Imagine building an empire from a literal storage closet, only to have your boss hand the keys to his spoiled nieces over a family lunch. This is the story of Keir Maddox, and you'll want to hear every second of how a replaceable asset dismantled a legacy. Subscribe for more. Let's dive in. I was already sitting when Lowell walked in, sleeves rolled, that smug Monday energy he always had when he thought he was being transparent. 12 of us around the glass conference table, top floor, downtown Boston, and I knew the second he smiled, it wasn't good. He said it like we were picking lunch spots. "We're giving your partnerships department to my nieces." Just that, nothing more. Ainsley and Breyer sat on his right, both in blazers worth more than my rent, like this was their coronation. Ainsley looked like she was tolerating the whole thing, bored and above it. Breyer kept shooting glances at me like she'd just egged my car and was waiting for me to notice. Nobody said a word. Lowell leaned back, hands folded. "Keir, you've done great work, but you're clearly not scaling with the business anymore." Like I was a piece of software that wouldn't update. Someone coughed. A chair scraped the floor. Across the table, our finance guy pretended to take notes while I watched 9 years of work slide out from under me like it was part of some quarterly shuffle. I looked right at Lowell and said, "Congratulations to them." I even smiled, tight, controlled. Because at 37, I'd already learned, never bleed in front of a man like Lowell. He'll just call it strategy. Ainsley gave this nod like I'd passed some silent test. Breyer shrugged with that smug, shallow little twitch people use when they think you're done talking, done mattering. Quick note. Before listening, share which city or country you're watching from. And let's continue. The room emptied fast. Nobody made eye contact on the way out. Noemi, my right hand since year 2, paused at the door but didn't say anything. Couldn't. I just gave her a look, like, I know. When it was just us, Lowell asked me to help transition the team, which was code for, give my nieces the keys to the kingdom and say thank you for the privilege. I told him I'd make it smooth. Then I walked out, went straight to the corner stairwell, and sat there for 10 minutes pretending I had a call. My name is Keir Maddox. I'm 37. I live in Somerville, Massachusetts. Son of 2 shopkeepers who ran a corner market on the south side and never trusted suits. 9 years ago, Lowell gave me the part of the Drayton Group nobody else wanted, supplier relationships that were already burning to the ground. Back then, he walked me through a mess of late payments and burnt bridges and said, "Fix this in 7 months or we shut it down." So I did. And now he was handing it off like I'd just been keeping it warm. Fine, let's roll it back. Let me show you how it started, before the knife went in. So I did what Lowell never expected. I showed up early, walked into that back office, and stood in the middle of a room that felt like a storage closet with ambition. The air smelled like burnt printer ink and stale coffee. There were dust-covered boxes stacked on metal shelves, faded charts taped crooked on the walls, and a busted filing cabinet that rattled every time the HVAC kicked in. No team, no welcome packet. Just a whiteboard with Q1 partnership goals scribbled in dried-out marker, and a yellow sticky note that read, "Start here?" The first binder I opened was a joke. Names scratched out, contacts long gone. Half the invoices were unpaid, and the other half were basically IOUs scribbled in pencil. I found supplier lists that hadn't been touched in years, and notes from reps who clearly just wanted to dump the department and move on. Lowell gave me 7 months to either flip it or fold it. I didn't ask questions. I just got in the car. I started local. Family-run bakeries, coffee roasters tucked in behind strip malls, butcher shops with cracked windows and 20-year-old signs. I sat across from folks at sticky tables and listened to them tell me how Drayton had promised the moon and delivered excuses. Some of them didn't even bother to hide their resentment. The first real test was Emmett Cole. He ran our biggest production house, a giant in his own quiet way. I showed up at his warehouse, waited 40 minutes while he ignored me, then sat across from him at a folding table in his office that smelled like warm metal and diesel. "You're the sixth suit they've sent," he said, arms folded across his chest. "Why should I waste time on you?" I didn't blink. "Because I grew up stocking shelves just like yours. I'm not here to manage you. I'm here to stop my boss from wasting your time again." He stared at me a long second, then said, "We'll see." And he meant it. Took 6 months before he returned a call without making me wait 2 days. That was the pattern. I didn't pitch. I didn't charm. I just kept my word, showed up when I said I would, admitted when we messed something up, and fixed it without excuses. One handshake at a time, one clean delivery at a time, until we went from 0 to 21 active, breathing partnerships that actually worked. By year 3, the partnerships test program had become the actual engine. Half the company's grocery and cafe suppliers ran through us. That's when I started hiring. First, Noemi Park, who could run operations better than anyone I'd ever met. Then folks like Daryl Voss, who could smooth talk a trucker at dawn and still be in the office with a report by noon. Lowell? He'd swing by twice a year, do his little tour, shake hands he wouldn't remember, and pitch our work like it was his idea. Meanwhile, we were the ones on the phone at 5 in the morning trying to track down a shipment lost between New Jersey and Connecticut. Then I saw it happen. Quiet, under the radar. One of our warehouse managers got reassigned. A cousin slid into the job like it was musical chairs. Nobody said it out loud, but the message was clear. Their relatives would always be put ahead of everyone else. I still didn't think it would hit me. I'd built something too solid, too real, or so I told myself. Eventually, I brought my parents' little market into the system, kept it quiet, just ran it like any other client. Watching their invoices come in, I started to see the cracks. The same company that paid me was cutting into their margins so tight it made my gut twist. But I didn't say anything. Not yet. I filed it away, handled it quiet, because back then, I still believed doing good work was enough to keep your seat at the table. The carpet in that diner had been gray when I first walked in 8 years earlier. Now it was some vague shade of egg yolk and old coffee, and the booths had that stickiness you just stopped noticing after a while. I came in because I needed 20 minutes where nobody needed anything from me. I ordered the usual, scrambled eggs, rye toast, no butter, and slid into the back corner booth near the window. Before the waitress could even bring my coffee, I heard a voice behind me say, "Black coffee, 2 eggs, no toast." The voice hit me before the name did. I'd heard it a dozen times on industry panels and podcasts. Sutton Hale. I glanced back and confirmed it. Gray jacket, no tie, weather-worn face like someone who didn't spend much time indoors. I looked down at my plate, debated paying the check and ducking out. Before I could move, Sutton leaned around the divider, locked eyes with me, and said, "You're Kearmatics, right? Drayton Group?" I gave him a slow nod. "That's right. You mind if I join you?" he asked. "Off the record?" He didn't wait for a yes. He slid into the booth across from me and got straight to the point. "How long do you think you've got before Lowell cuts you out of what you built?" I let out a short laugh, tried to play it off. "Lowell's a lot of things, but he likes results. I keep delivering. That's all that matters." Sutton shook his head. "That's what I used to think too, until I watched my own board hand everything to a guy's nephew who didn't know the difference between an invoice and a handshake." He picked up his coffee, didn't drink it yet. "You built the engine, right? The partnership network. That wasn't there before you." "Started from a storage closet and bad paper," I said. "Why?" He looked me dead in the eye. "Because you're inconvenient now." I frowned. "How's that?" "Because people answer your calls faster than they answer Lowell's. Because you've got FaceTime with every supplier worth keeping. Because you're the real reason this whole system doesn't fall apart, and guys like Lowell don't like depending on anyone they can't control." I didn't say anything, just sat there staring at my eggs while the pieces rearranged in my head. He pulled a folded receipt from his wallet, slid it across the table. "That's my personal number, not the office line. If I'm wrong, toss it. If I'm right, You're going to need someone who speaks your language. What language is that? The one that knows how much damage a man like Lowell can do when he thinks he's protecting his legacy. I picked up the receipt, turned it over once, didn't look at the number. He nodded like we were done, stood up, and left his coffee untouched. The next morning, I told myself he was fishing for a hire. Guys like Sutton always want to poach talent cheap. But every time Lowell walked past our desks without saying a word, every time he smiled a little too wide when someone mentioned succession planning, Sutton's voice came back louder. A week later, we were in a leadership call, and Lowell mentioned his niece, Ainsley. Just finishing her MBA, he said, like that was supposed to mean something. That same afternoon, Breyer popped into the office unannounced and walked through like she owned it, snapping photos for some digital rebrand campaign she claimed was coming. Then, 2 days after that, I caught Lowell in the hallway talking to one of the finance directors. He said, "In the end, the future stays in the family," and laughed like it was a punchline. That's when it started, the tilt. Not a full collapse, just a shift in the floorboards, subtle enough that you could still pretend everything was fine if you didn't look too close. But I looked. And I remembered Sutton's hand on that receipt saying, "You're gonna need someone." That tilt in the floor didn't go away. It stayed with me the next couple weeks like a loose board under your heel, something you could ignore until the day it snapped. One afternoon, Lowell walked into my office without knocking. He leaned against the doorway like we were old friends catching up after a golf game. His smile was relaxed, casual, the kind he used when he thought he was being generous. "Ainsley's finishing her program soon," he said. "She'll need a real division to cut her teeth on." He said it like he was talking about giving someone a spare desk. I kept my voice steady. "That'll be a big responsibility." Lowell nodded like the decision had already been signed in stone. "Exactly. New energy, new ideas." Then he pushed off the door frame and walked away before I could answer. I sat there for a long minute, staring at the hallway after he disappeared. My desk was covered in supplier schedules and delivery updates, the same work that had built his so-called engine. But suddenly it all felt temporary. That evening I pulled the folded diner receipt out of my wallet. Sutton's number was still there, smudged from months of being carried around. I turned it over between my fingers, then finally picked up the phone. When he answered, I said, "You still like those overcooked hash browns at that diner?" He didn't hesitate. "Tomorrow morning." Over the next 5 months, we met there 11 times. Always early, before the office opened, or late after the dinner rush died down. No laptops, no spreadsheets. Just legal pads, coffee, and blunt conversations about how fragile a business becomes when one person holds the relationships. "I'm not stealing anything," I told him the second meeting. "No files, no contracts, no tricks." Sutton nodded slowly. "Good. Because the second you start playing that game, you lose the moral ground." "What I want," I said, "is somewhere the people I work with can land if this thing collapses." He leaned back in the booth and studied me. "You're talking about farmers, roasters, bakeries." "I'm talking about the people who wake up at 3 a.m. to make sure everyone else has breakfast." After that, the conversations shifted. Not plotting, not scheming, just reality. I started introducing him to a few people quietly. Not as some secret alliance, just normal meetings. Coffee after supplier visits. Casual introductions after industry panels. The first was Emmett. I told him straight. "This is Sutton Hale. He runs Hale Collective. I figured you two should know each other." Emmett looked Sutton up and down like a mechanic inspecting a used engine. Later, he told me exactly what he thought. "Sutton's a shark," Emmett said over the phone one night. "Pushes hard on numbers, tries to find the weak spots." Then he paused before adding something that mattered more. "But he actually listened when I talked about the craft. Most guys only care about volume." Around that same time, I ran into Maris Elwood at a supply conference in Providence. Maris ran a mid-sized distribution outfit that floated somewhere between companies like Drayton and Hale. She caught me near the coffee station and said quietly, "You know Sutton isn't some saint, right?" "I'm aware," I said. "He hates being used," she added. "That's his main moral compass." I shrugged. "I'm not looking for a hero. I'm just choosing the lesser toxic option." Maris studied me a second, then nodded once. "Then be ready to live with Gray," she said before walking off. Back at the office, I started preparing in ways nobody noticed at first. I rewrote partnership summaries in plain language instead of corporate jargon. I documented which suppliers cared about price, which ones cared about reliability, and which ones just wanted someone to answer the phone when things went wrong. I knew the second Lowell's nieces arrived, they'd try to run everything from dashboards and charts. But none of that showed the real currency of the business: trust. Noemi noticed before anyone else. One afternoon in the break room, she leaned against the counter and watched me scribbling notes into a legal pad. "You suddenly care a lot about documentation," she said. I didn't look up. "Trying to stay organized." "That's not it," she replied calmly. "You're preparing for something." I finally met her eyes. Noemi had been with me long enough to recognize patterns. "I think the ground is shifting," I said quietly. She didn't ask another question, but her expression tightened like someone bracing for a storm. Meanwhile, the company's internal chat kept buzzing in the background. Employees vented about deadlines, management decisions, and the usual nonsense that builds up inside a big company. Every once in a while, someone would post a joke. "Place your bets on which manager gets sacrificed next quarter." The first few times I saw it, I ignored it. Corporate gallows humor happens everywhere. But the more those messages popped up, the less funny they felt. One night, I sat alone in my office, long after everyone else had left. The building was quiet, except for the hum of the air system and the distant rattle of an elevator somewhere down the hall. I opened my notebook and wrote down the names of every supplier who trusted my word more than the company logo. Then, I closed the notebook, slid it into my bag, turned off the office lights, and locked the door behind me. Monday morning, the glass conference room was too bright for what it was about to hold. Lowell strolled in 10 minutes late like he wanted the anticipation. I was already seated at the end of the table, folders ready, face neutral. Noemi sat near me. She didn't say much, but her jaw was tight. Lowell clapped his hands once, real loud. "Thanks for making time, everyone. Big moment today." Then he turned to his right, where Ainsley and Breyer were sitting like they'd just won a prize neither of them had earned. "Let me introduce your new leadership," he said, grinning wide. "Ainsley Drayton, Director of Strategic Partnerships. Breyer Drayton, Director of Innovation and Brand." Those titles landed like paper signs slapped on locked doors. Ainsley stood and smiled like a politician at a ribbon cutting. "I want to thank my uncle for trusting me with this incredible opportunity," she said, glancing at me for exactly 1 second like she was checking a compliance box. Breyer didn't stand. She just leaned forward and said, "We're excited to finally bring some fresh energy into the mix." I saw Dariel look down at his hands. Another staffer shifted in their seat like they were trying not to flinch. Even in that first 5 minutes, the divide between the sisters was obvious. Ainsley started talking about restructuring vendor engagement models. Breyer interrupted with some dig about how stale methods were why we need a reboot. Noemi caught my eye briefly. We didn't need to speak. That look said everything. Once it was done, people shuffled out fast, murmuring polite things as they passed. Nobody lingered. Lowell stayed back. He waited until the room cleared, then looked at me like he was doing me a favor. "We'd like you to stay on for 3 weeks," he said, tone light. "Help transition the knowledge." Translation: hand them everything I built and pretend I was thrilled to do it. I nodded. "I understand." He smiled like he'd won something and left without another word. That Friday, Ainsley called a town hall meeting in our open office space. She stood next to the big monitor with a slide deck behind her and talked for 15 minutes about building on long-term partnerships to support sustainable growth. Every sentence sounded like it had been approved by a professor. Then Breyer jumped in with her part. "We'll also be modernizing the brand voice," she said with a little smirk. "Let's not be afraid to let go of what's no longer working." You could feel the tension buzz under the surface. Nobody clapped until the sisters were done. Then there was this soft, scattered applause that didn't quite fill the room. Afterwards, people came to my desk one by one. Quiet, careful. "This isn't right," one guy muttered. "You built this from nothing," another said. I didn't have answers, just kept packing my boxes, 2 of them. That's all 9 years came down to. One held supplier photos, printed reports, a mug Emmett's daughter had painted with my name in crooked letters. The other had legal pads, sticky notes, receipts with phone numbers I hadn't memorized but couldn't throw out. Noemi hovered nearby while I taped the last box shut. She didn't say anything at first, just handed me a Sharpie. Her silence was heavier than any speech. I loaded both boxes into my car that night without saying goodbye. No long speech, no big scene, just one last look at the building where I'd fought to make something real. Back home, I dropped onto the couch in the dark, still wearing the same dress shirt from the meeting. The room was quiet, too quiet. The kind of silence that fills your ears after a storm, but before you realize what's left standing. My phone buzzed, a text from Sutton. "So, did it happen?" I stared at the screen for a second, then typed back, "Yep, the nieces inherit on Monday." Another message followed a minute later. "You ready?" I looked around the apartment, at the blank wall where I'd meant to hang shelves for 2 years, and at the unopened bottle of bourbon on the counter I never seemed to need, until now. I stared down at his question for a long time, then I typed back, "Ask me again next week." Saturday morning hit different. No alarms, no pre-dawn supplier calls, no freight tracking tabs blinking on my laptop. I made eggs slow, flipped them twice, sat at the kitchen table with black coffee and a notepad I didn't touch. For the first time in almost 10 years, I didn't know what my day was supposed to be for. Around 10, Emmett called. His voice was scratchy, like he'd rehearsed what he was about to say 3 times too many. "I was going to wait until Monday," he said, but it didn't sit right. "Look, working with you all these years, it changed how we thought about clients. You treated us like partners, like we mattered." I rubbed my jaw, looked out the window. "You always did matter, Emmett. I just made sure the company finally acted like it." "My contract's up this Friday," he said. "Technically, I could re-sign with Drayton for another 3 years, but I've been talking with Sutton." That landed heavy, even though I'd expected it. "You gotta do what's right for your shop," I told him. "I'm not there anymore. Just make sure it's a deal you can live with." "I know Ainsley and Breyer aren't you," he said. "I just didn't want you thinking this was some kind of betrayal." "It's not," I said. "You don't owe Drayton loyalty for the work we did together. That loyalty was to people, not the name on the invoice." By late afternoon, 2 more suppliers called. Different tone, same undercurrent. Careful, thoughtful conversations from people who'd spent years running trucks for us, asking if walking away now was turning their back on me or honoring what I built. I kept it simple. I didn't tell anyone to leave. I just didn't lie either. I told them Ainsley didn't know their faces. I told them Breyer hadn't sat at their tables, and they already knew that was true. Then came the message from Noemi. 1 line. "Have you seen the all-staff email from Lowell?" I hadn't. I told her that. 10 minutes later, she forwarded me a screenshot someone had dropped anonymously into the internal chat. It was from Lowell to his senior team. You could tell he didn't mean for it to go beyond those walls. "People are replaceable assets," it said. "Sentimentality around individual contributors cannot be allowed to slow succession." I read that sentence 4 times. That email made the rounds fast. Darielle texted me later and said someone had printed it out and taped it in the break room. Management kept tearing them down. People kept putting them back up. That night, around 9, Noemi called me. Her voice was lower than usual, like she didn't want her walls to hear her. "Ainsley pulled me into her office today," she said. offered me a shiny new title if I'd help her re-engineer processes and start fresh. I could already hear where that was going. She wants to erase the history, I said. Worse, she wants me to rewrite it, pretend none of what we built matters. I waited. I told her no, Noemi said finally. I told her I won't be part of scrubbing your name off the walls. I gripped the edge of the counter so tight my hand cramped. I didn't even realize I'd been holding my breath until she stopped talking. Thank you, I said quietly. I'm not doing it for you, she replied. I'm doing it because I remember what it took to make this place work. Sunday dragged. I tried reading, walking, anything to push the noise out of my head, but it kept circling back. That evening, Sutton called. No greeting, just that familiar straight-line voice. Do you actually understand what tomorrow's going to feel like? I've been thinking about that, I said. He didn't let up. Not for you, for the suppliers, for your team, for the folks who spent years trusting your name more than the brand behind it. I sat on the edge of the couch, phone pressed to my ear, staring at nothing. I spent so much energy making sure Lowell didn't get to skate on my work, I said. I didn't stop to think what happens when people like Noemi or Darielle have to live in the wreckage. Then you better get clear on it, Sutton said, because once the unraveling starts, you don't get to steer it. He hung up before I could answer. I sat there, lights off, phone warm in my hand, thinking about all the threads I'd held together for so long, and what it meant now that I'd let them go. Monday morning, I didn't even shower. Sat on the couch in sweats with a mug of coffee that tasted like old pennies and tried not to stare at the clock. My old work phone sat face up on the table. I hadn't shut it off yet, couldn't bring myself to. By 9:30, it started buzzing. First, the operations manager, then Breyer's new assistant, then 3 numbers I knew by heart. I watched it light up like a fire alarm and didn't touch it. Sutton's first text came in at 10. 5 suppliers pulled out. I didn't respond, just set the phone back down and kept sipping. At 11:30, 4 more not renewing, 1 pausing deliveries until leadership stabilizes, their words. It wasn't satisfaction I felt. It wasn't relief either. Just this tight, dull pressure behind my ribs, like I was holding something heavy and sharp and couldn't set it down yet. By early afternoon, Emmett texted me directly. Simple, clear. Signed with Hale. Sutton agreed to build in crew protections. Thought you should know. I stared at it for a long second, then typed, You did right. Thanks for letting me know. A few minutes later, my mom called. Kier, she said, low and anxious. We didn't get the delivery from Drayton this morning. Do you know what's going on? I walked her through a backup plan. Called a small bakery I still had on speed dial, got them to send over enough to cover the weekend. Mom, I said, this might be the first of a few bumps, but I'll make sure you're covered, okay? She didn't ask more questions. She just said, Thank you, baby, and hung up. First time I used that network for my family instead of Lowell. Later in the day, Noemi called. I could hear wind and traffic behind her. She sounded like she was standing on the sidewalk. They've been in the building all morning, she said. Breyer and Ainsley. Phones ringing nonstop. Nobody answering. How bad? I asked. No coordination, she said. Ainsley canceled one of Breyer's campaigns mid-launch. Breyer told comms to ignore Ainsley's vendor updates. It's sabotage. Between sisters. I closed my eyes, leaned back against the couch. They're blaming each other, she added. But it's not just them. The vendors are walking. People are scared. Darielle called that night, late. His voice was hoarse, like he'd just come from a long, loud meeting. You know that email Lowell sent about replaceable assets? He asked. Somebody brought it up in a meeting this afternoon. Quiet at first, then people started talking. What did they say? They started out scared, then mad. One guy said, If we're so replaceable, why are they begging us to stay now? I didn't respond. That's when it changed, Dariel said. Something shifted in the room. People aren't just nervous now, they're insulted. After we hung up, I walked into the kitchen, poured myself a glass of water I didn't drink, and stood there in the dark with the fridge humming like a generator behind me. Then my phone buzzed again, this time from Lowell. We need to talk. This supplier situation is critical. You owe it to your former team to be professional. That word, professional, sat on the screen like a threat pretending to be polite. I didn't answer. Instead, I put on a hoodie, grabbed my keys, and walked out the door. I didn't have a destination. I just kept walking. Past the first cafe we ever brought into the network. Past a tiny shop that hadn't made it through the pandemic. Past 2 bakeries we'd onboarded in year 3, the ones that used to call Noemi before they called their own reps. I stopped outside one storefront. The lights were on, but the shelves were half empty. I knew the owners by name. I remembered the day we got their supply chain untangled. I remembered how proud they were when the first Drayton truck showed up on time. That pride didn't mean much now. I walked another 2 miles before turning around. Back home, Sutton called. He didn't waste time. "Kier," he said, "this thing is unraveling faster than I expected. You sure you want to stay hands off?" I hesitated, hands still on the doorknob. My legs ached. My head buzzed. "I thought I was," I said. "Now I'm not sure." "Because this isn't just a power shift anymore," Sutton said. "It's a breach. People are walking on principle. That's rare. That's not easy to fix." I didn't answer him right away. I just sat down at the kitchen table, pulled the receipt with his number back out of the drawer, and stared at the creases in the paper. Trust was moving, fast, and once it started running, no title could keep up. The days blurred after that Monday. My phone stayed hot with calls I didn't take, names I knew flashing on screen. I didn't need to hear the panic. The messages said enough, short ones from Dariel, from one of the drivers, even from a junior coordinator I barely trained. All of them said the same thing in different ways. It's a mess here. By day 3, I got an email from Breyer. Long, too polished, like it had been drafted by a PR team. "We'd love to honor the foundation you built," she wrote. "Would you be open to coffee to share some legacy insights?" Legacy insights. I read that phrase twice, then dragged the email to trash without blinking. A day later, Ainsley left me a voicemail. Her voice had lost that smug calm from the conference room. Now it was all thin patience and practiced empathy. "I know emotions are high right now, but the family needs everyone to put that aside for the sake of the business." I didn't call back. I didn't even save the number. I did answer when Noemi called. Her voice was sharp, clipped. "Lowell pulled me into a conference room," she said. "Offered more pay, new title, said I could help stabilize things." "And?" I asked. "I told him no," she said. "Told him I'm not staying under a man who thinks the people who built his success are disposable." I exhaled through my nose, pressed my hand to my face. I wanted to feel proud, and I did, but it burned too. "You shouldn't have to be the one holding that line," I told her. "I'm not holding it alone," she said. "I just wanted you to know." On day 15, Maris met me at a quiet spot off Beacon. We sat on the patio, drinking coffee that had gone cold before either of us touched it. "It's ugly out there," she said. "Buyers are furious. Suppliers are scattering. Everyone's talking." "Lowell blaming it on vendor greed yet?" I asked. She smiled, no humor in it. "That and disloyalty. According to him, people jumped ship for better money." I stared out toward the street. She leaned forward. "Sutton's pushing hard, locking in better terms while Drayton flails." "I didn't jump to the good side," I said, "just the side that doesn't spit in my face." "You don't need to justify it to me," she replied. "Just know you're not invisible in this." On day 23, Lowell called me directly. No greeting. "You did this. You poisoned them against us." I let the silence stretch. "I didn't force anyone," I said. "I just told the truth for 9 years. You handed that work to people who didn't respect it. They walked to where they felt safe. You're ungrateful, he snapped. I gave you a shot when no one else wanted that mess. And I gave you 9 years of steady growth you never tried to understand. He hung up on me. I tossed the phone on the counter and didn't pick it up for the rest of the day. Next morning, Noemi forwarded me a screenshot of the internal memo. Ainsley and Breyer reassigned to special projects. Partnerships under review. Interim head of partnerships to be announced. I Googled the guy's name. He came from finance. He'd never even worked in operations. I doubted he could name 3 of our key suppliers without a spreadsheet. Less than a week later, Noemi called again. He wants you back, she said. Same role, more money. Says he wants to reset how things are done. I didn't answer right away. She waited. He really thinks you'll come back and clean up the same mess he made twice? I finally spoke. I'm not spending the second half of my life fixing what he never valued in the first place. Noemi let out a breath. Thought you'd say that. I just needed to hear it. The days after I turned Lowell down felt louder than the ones before. Not because of chaos, because of possibility. My phone rang with numbers I didn't recognize. Recruiters with sharp voices and fake warmth saying they'd heard I was suddenly available. Owners of bakeries, butcher shops, small roasters, asking if I could do for them what I'd done for Drayton. They didn't want decks. They wanted direction, help, not hype. One afternoon, Maris sat across from me at a cafe off Tremont. She tore the paper from her cup like she was working something out in her head. You know, she said, you don't have to go back under a boss. Not Sutton, not Lowell. You could build something of your own. You already have the trust. I didn't answer right away. I kept thinking about my parents' market, how many times they'd come close to folding when the big players hiked prices or cut delivery windows. They never complained out loud, but I saw it. In the way my mom kept coupons behind the register. In the way my dad watched every truck like it might not come back. That's when it landed. I could either keep making men like Lowell rich, or I could finally put my spine behind people like my parents. I called Sutton the next day. We met at the same diner where this whole thing started. He slid into the booth with 2 coffees already in hand. I'm not asking for a job, I told him, and I'm not taking one either. He raised an eyebrow. All right, what are you asking for? I'm building something small, focused, one thing done right. I want to help independent shops and suppliers manage partnerships without getting swallowed. No empire. Just real leverage for the people holding the tools. He frowned, tapped his fingers once on the table, then shrugged. There's room for that. Market's shifting. Most firms still think trust is just a metric. You keep it honest, I'll send some work your way. I'd rather compete with someone solid than babysit another clown in a suit. That was it. No pitch, no handshake deal. Just alignment. Emmett signed on first. Nothing dramatic, just a short agreement I drafted myself. I'd help him manage his Hale relationship and build backups so he'd never be that dependent again. He didn't need buzzwords. He needed someone who wouldn't vanish at the first hiccup. I rented a room above a bike repair shop on the edge of Somerville. It smelled like grease and coffee filters. Perfect. 2 second-hand desks. 1 used printer that sounded like it was dying every time it started. I texted Noemi a photo of the space and told her the truth. I can't pay corporate rates yet, but I can offer you something Lowell never did, a say in how we treat people. She didn't answer right away. Took her a week. During that time, Lowell offered her another promotion, better title, higher salary. She didn't mention numbers when she finally called. I'm in, she said, but only if we don't forget where we came from. We won't, I told her. We never had that luxury. 3 months in, I ran into Dariel at a weekend market. We grabbed coffee in paper cups and leaned against a food truck in the shade. Half the old department's gone, he said. Other half's just waiting for something better. Nobody trusts the Drayton name anymore. Not even after the reshuffle? I asked. He laughed. You know how many special project titles are floating around over there? The place feels like a penalty box. He told me more than I'd heard before, about the screaming matches between Ainsley and Breyer, the way they'd cancel each other's meetings, reroute plans just to prove a point, drag staff into crossfire until people started calling it the Royal Feud. It made that 23-day collapse make a whole lot more sense. Not long after that, my parents became clients, if you can call it that. I helped them negotiate new terms with a local roaster and a farm co-op. Got their margins healthy again. Watched my mom breathe a little easier when she ran payroll that month. No fanfare, no press release. Just my dad handing me a paper bag with 2 sandwiches and saying, "Figured you wouldn't eat lunch otherwise." That moment hit harder than any bonus check I'd ever gotten at Drayton. Somewhere in there, it hit me. This was mine. Not built on someone else's last name, not balanced on someone else's grace. And nobody could pull it out from under me with a single sentence in a meeting. A year to the week after Lowell slid my department across that glass table like a side dish, I sat in the office I built from scratch. Our name on the door, my name on the lease. Phones rang, printers hummed, Noemi barked into a headset 3 desks over, and I was finally telling this story in between calls, not in place of them. We weren't big, 11 suppliers, 19 buyers, and a waiting list I hadn't expected to grow so fast. But the lights stayed on, and when people picked up, they knew my voice. I didn't need a title anymore, just my name. Noemi ran operations like she always had, but now she got credit, real credit. Her name sat right at the top of our project decks, our pitches, our welcome emails. I caught it there sometimes and had to remind myself how easy it would have been for someone like Lowell to wipe it off completely and never blink. We'd just brought on someone new, Leora Quinn. Fresh out of school, smart, eager. Best thing about her was how she wasn't afraid to say, "I don't know," and actually mean it. That honesty was rare and useful. During her first week, I told her something I never got told. I said, "I'll teach you everything I know about how we built this, how we protected the trust, not just managed it. But if you ever want to start something of your own, I'll help you do that too. I'm not here to keep you small." She just nodded, wrote it down like it mattered. I could see some of my younger self in how she watched people, how she tracked patterns the way other interns chased praise. One afternoon, Sutton stopped by with 2 coffees and a real smile, which was rare for him. He leaned on the edge of a desk and said, "Industry's different now. Lowell's struggling to fill roles. Some of his best accounts jumped ship. People are starting to use your name when they talk about the future." I didn't say much, just handed him the good cup. A few days later, Ainsley called. I didn't recognize the number, but I answered anyway. Her voice was different, quieter. She said she finally understood that being handed a title wasn't the same as earning respect. Said she barely lasted half a year before her uncle moved her into something safer. "Watching it fall apart taught me more than my entire degree," she said. I told her I appreciated the honesty, but I also told her that apology didn't buy back my 9 years, and it certainly didn't erase what it felt like to stand in that room while everyone pretended it was business as usual. When we hung up, I didn't feel bitter, didn't feel smug, just felt done. I looked across the office and saw Leora asking Noemi something about a schedule. The whiteboard behind them had names, not account numbers. Real people, real weight. That was the real payback. Not watching Lowell's name slip, walking away, building something no one could take from me, teaching the next person not to settle for a crown they didn't ask for. What would you have done if you were in Kier's shoes when Lowell offered to bring him back? Drop your answer in the comments, and don't forget to like and subscribe for more real stories like this. As we wrap up, can I ask you something? If you have hype, tap it. Please subscribe and like, and comment what you're ready to walk away from.